Hey everybody, this is Mr. Marshall at Stony Lane. I want to talk to you about reading workshop today, because sometimes what happens is we can read a really good book, and it can be a book that we love, but we're just not sure what to think about, or we're reading it as part of a partnership or as part of a book club, and it's time for us to talk about it, and we're just not sure what to talk about either. Did that ever happen to you? It happens to me. It happens to all different kinds of readers. And so, one thing that you can do to always have something to think about, or always have something to talk about, or always have something to write about, is that you can think about something surprising that your character does. Okay? When your character does something that's surprising to you, you can pose a question that starts with these words. How could, or another way to do it is to pose a question that starts with why would, and then kind of like ask yourself that question. And then that can be the kind of question that you could talk a lot about, or think a lot about, or write a lot about. Okay? So let me show you what I mean. This is one of my favorite chapter books. Maybe it's one of your favorites too. It's Because of Winn-Dixie by Katie Camillo. And so this is the kind of book that I can read again and again, and I always have something new to think about. Did that ever happen to you? So I'm going to show you what I mean. I'm going to try and find a place in here where a character is doing something surprising, and then I'm going to ask myself questions that start with how could or why would. Okay, watch. Let me try that. So one part of the book that makes me wonder, because I'm sort of surprised, is whenever Opal, she's the main character of the book, talks about her dad, she doesn't talk about him by saying dad or daddy or my father. She calls him the preacher. The preacher. Well, that's his job, right? He's a preacher. That's his job. He preaches, and she says things like, she's talking about how Winn-Dixie, that's the dog, is meeting her father. It says, Daddy, I want to show you the new Winn-Dixie. The preacher put down his pencil and rubbed his nose, and finally he looked up. Well, he said, smiling real big at Winn-Dixie, well, now, don't you look handsome? Winn-Dixie smiled back at the preacher. He went over and put his head on the preacher's lap. He smells nice too, said the preacher. He rubbed Winn-Dixie's head and looked into his eyes. Why would a girl not call her dad, dad? Why would she say the preacher? That says something about their relationship. It says something about what she thinks about her dad, right? What does that mean? How could she call him the preacher? And she does it again and again all throughout the book, right? I noticed that because I've read this book quite a few times. How could a girl only call her dad the preacher? Well, maybe it's because their relationship has this sort of like distance, right? There's stuff that the preacher, her dad, doesn't ever talk about to Opal, right? Or like about her mom, right? Her mom, she's never known her mom, and he won't talk about it. Maybe that helps show that, right? You see what I'm doing? You see how I took something surprising that the character does, and I asked how could or why would a girl call her dad the preacher? Okay, here's another one. Let's take a look. So later on in the book, we meet a character named Gloria Dump. Remember Gloria Dump? Gloria Dump was the neighbor who everybody thought was a witch, because she never came out, she never talked to anybody, her house was kind of old and run down. And then Winn-Dixie goes in there, and so Opal follows, and she gets to meet Gloria Dump, and she gets to know Gloria Dump. She went into her backyard. No one's ever gone into her backyard before. And she had this very strange, surprising thing. She had glass bottles hanging from the trees. Can you imagine that? Glass bottles hanging from your trees. I don't know anyone that would do that. So that must mean something. That must mean something about Gloria Dump. So, how could a person hang glass bottles from the trees in her yard? Actually, we know how she did it. She climbed up there and she put it there. But why would she do that? That's such a strange thing to do. So what I can do is I can reread that part about the glass bottles and then think more about that. Okay, I can think more about that. So let's go. It's in chapter 14, actually. So I'm going to read you that part, and let's think about why would a character have bottles in the tree in her yard. They were talking about how Otis had been to jail, right? And so Opal was really surprised by that. She was really upset by that because she'd never known anyone that had been to jail. That was hard for her to figure out. And then Gloria points, she goes, look up at this tree. I looked up and there were bottles hanging from just about every branch. There were whiskey bottles and beer bottles and wine bottles all tied with string, and some of them were clanking against each other and making a spooky kind of noise. Me and Winn-Dixie stood and stared at the tree, and the hair on top of his head rose up a little bit and he growled deep in his throat. Gloria Dump pointed her cane at the tree. What do you think about this tree? I said, I don't know. Why are all those bottles on it? And she says, to keep the ghosts away. What ghosts? The ghosts of all the things I'd done wrong. I looked at all the bottles on the tree. You did that many things wrong? Mm-hmm, said Gloria. More than that. But you're the nicest person I know, I told her. Don't mean I haven't done bad things. So, wait a minute. She's trying to use those bottles to remind herself of all the things she did bad, that maybe she doesn't want to do bad anymore. And she's talking about this right when they're talking about how Otis had been to jail and thinking about all the things that people do wrong sometimes, but they can still be nice people. Do you see what I'm doing? Do you see how I'm taking something surprising that a character does, and I'm using these questions, how could or why would, to think about my book? That's something that you can do. So if you're reading a book and you're just not sure what to think about or talk about or write about, you can do what we did. You can pick something surprising that a character does and ask yourself a question that starts with how could or why would. Okay, why don't you try that? And I'll see you next time.